we would suddenly hear a very weird, cold, remote, electronic sounding voice, like it's coming through waves of distortion. And it was not like any, you know, I was familiar with the little machines you can get to distort a voice on the phone. Nothing like that. This was spooky, and it wasn't speaking any language that I knew. Well, my name is Nancy Du Tertre, and I know you're listening to your higher self.
Hmm. Nancy, thank you for taking the time to join. I know it's late. I appreciate you for that, but welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jay. Appreciate it.
So, Nancy, the skeptic, psychic. First off, what does it mean to be skeptic, in your opinion?
Okay, so technically the moniker is the skeptical psychic.
Okay, the
That's
skeptical
yeah,
psychic.
skeptical. That's how I've been known for a long time. So, and what does it mean to be psychic? Is not psychic. Well, that's a whole other question. Skeptical. Um, Interestingly, I take part in a lot of these online groups of scientists who are discussing issues having to do with consciousness. And the one topic that rolls back year after year after year is, well, I'm skeptical of all of that stuff, that psychic stuff. And then, okay, well, and then the people who are, the pro and con, the other folks are saying, well, what do you mean by skeptical? And the skeptics don't really understand what they mean by skeptical. Anyways, somebody recently defined it rather well. And it's something I've been trying to point out to people for ages, which is, in the scientific world in particular, people who claim to be skeptical, show me the evidence, prove it to me, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, I know it doesn't exist. They are deniers. A true skeptic is somebody who tests something first, doesn't automatically buy into a belief system, no matter what that belief system is, and who kind of tests it out and then is open-minded, comes to a conclusion on it. I
Hmm.
mean, I try to be skeptical on everything that I do. I don't necessarily believe myself on anything.
How did you get into all this work, right? I think I was listening to an interview. Um, you have dabbled in Gestalt therapies, right? Like I've just learned about those recently, and that's interesting to me. Like, how'd you get into this?
I wouldn't say dabbled because I'm certified and trained for more than 20 years in it. So intuitive Gestalt psychotherapy is what I was doing. And what I was discovering through those workshops and those formats, doing that kind of intuitive Gestalt work, was that there was information that was clearly floating out there in the air, that you could get a whole bunch of people to pick up on the identical thing, the same thing, without any data that would have tipped anybody off. So that got me really interested. I was originally going to write a book about the psychology of intuition.
Hmm.
And the problem was that, and I thought that was going to be easy, actually. Um, and I was only going to do it because my um, Gestalt psychotherapy mentor had sort of stalled out on the book that he was going to write, and I thought, well, he ought to. It was his methodology. He was going to be like the next Fritz Perls. I mean, and he wasn't doing it. So I thought, well, heck, I'm going to do it anyway. So what I discovered was psychologists were not particularly interested, because if they were, if they were interested in an intuition, they would have to give up their power position in the what's called the dyad between the the patient, or let's say the client, and the therapist. The therapist is they get paid because they're coming into the relationship supposedly with better information, more authority, and the ability to guide the client. And what happens is, if you acknowledge intuition as a source, a valid source of data, you've just messed up your own authority, because at that point your client has got authority, and maybe you ought to be revealing something intuitively about yourself.
Intuition is so fascinating to me, being able to receive information and data of consciousness, right? Like that's what I think it is. I think fundamentally this reality is made up of consciousness, right? And we are that consciousness. And so we can receive information, right? But it's interpreting that information, right? And because I don't think it's the way that my mind works, it's not going to be like how I interpret information right now, like visual and like in a way that's linear. Then I can kind of use my analytical mind to create narratives or a story, right? I think it's different. I think I don't know. I think a lot of it is metaphorical, maybe. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, right? Like when you collect information from the field or consciousness, whatever you want to call that, like in piecing the puzzle together, like what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I've been teaching this stuff for decades. Okay, so I have taught psychic development, I've taught mediumship, I did monthly workshops in the New York tri-state area for many years. And then I switched over and started teaching remote viewing, which is what I like to call clairvoyance with protocols. It's not the same as clairvoyance. A lot of people misuse the term. But in teaching all of these things, I have learned that the most pig-headed people are intellectuals. They have analytical minds. They're extremely bright, but they're so bright they don't have a clue that they're operating on a monorail in terms of their thought process. They don't get it because they don't see it. And besides, if they did get it, there's a problem, because it would essentially upset their entire system of feeling authoritative, feeling knowledgeable, feeling that they can backtrack their information and all that kind of stuff. When you get into this kind of work, you have to take tremendous risks. And I was not born, well, I mean, everybody's born psychic anyway. You have to, I had no psychic experiences that I was aware of, except for maybe one. Yeah. Other than that, no. In my family, nobody believed in it. Nobody's psychic. Everybody's academic. They're highly intellectual. And so it didn't exist. I had to teach myself and train myself into everything. So in the process of training, I now have sat on both sides of the fence. And I know what it feels like to think that you know how to think. And I have learned the process, and it's in many ways, it's excruciating. If you have to take terrible risks, you have to, one of my biggest fears was making an idiot out of myself, because I was just speaking off the top of my head. And God forbid that would be, foolish or silly or not respected, or, any number of things. And I had to do it publicly over and over and over and over again, until I finally, and I kept dismissing everything that I was coming up with. I was coming up with good stuff, actually. And I kept saying to myself, well, or I was telling everybody else, nah, it's luck. I'm guessing. It's a probability. You guys are too nice. You're trying to, make exceptions for me. Whatever excuse I could come up with to not validate the reality of it. And eventually I realized my teachers and fellow students started laughing at me when I would come up and say those things. Like, yeah, you're doing that again. And so I began to realize that I would be foolish if I didn't acknowledge that this stuff is real. it operates very, very differently from normal logical thinking, linear thinking, which is what we're all doing.
Sure. No, I do that a lot, right? Like,
We all do. The fact that we're both speaking a language right now means that we're engaged in linear thinking.
sure. Absolutely. What were you practicing, or what were you doing when you had to make yourself vulnerable to say things off the top of your head? Was it remote viewing, or what was that?
No, remote viewing didn't come along until later. No, this was just, I was apprenticed to a well-known psychic detective for close to a decade. So we would, it was a process of learning and then, coming up with cases and working on cases. And especially whenever you're dealing with people's most vulnerable or precious issues, my fear is, I'm going to say something completely ridiculous, and it won't be helpful. It'll be harmful. So I had to be really careful about what I was coming up with.
Do you feel it in your body, right? When you're helping do these types of cases, like if there are any type of like murder cases or anything like that, do you feel it in your body?
So every once in a while, you're really talking about people who are more engaged in that sort of somatic type of experience, which I didn't get. Well, no, let me put it this way. No, actually, it does happen. It's just I wasn't fully aware of it. In one of the earliest things that I was working on, and this was a very long time ago, one of the very first, it wasn't even a formal case or anything, but I had a colleague who, or a friend, her colleague had gone missing, and there was, everything seemed to be fine. The person had been missing, I think, for, I don't know, a couple of days, nothing extraordinary. And she said, well, where can we find this person? And my immediate sense was, no, let me take it back. I was getting imagery, okay, which is not a sensory experience, kind of. It's I don't know how to explain it. It's a visual experience for me. I'm mostly visual, but I get auditory as well. And I started to realize, as I was trying to explain to this person where I thought their colleague was, I was having trouble breathing and my lungs felt really tight. I was sort of gasping, and I'm thinking, what the heck? And then I thought, well, no, I must be just nervous, because doing this kind of work, especially, was like one of my first times trying, made me nervous. But I was sort of, like that. And I think, wow. And then I thought, okay, what does that mean? I ended up telling my friend that I thought that her colleague was deceased. She thought that he was still alive. I said, I'm so sorry, but I don't think so. And of course, I felt terrible, because what do I know? I don't know anything. And I'm talking off the top of my head, and what a risk. I said, I'm so sorry. I think he's deceased because I'm having trouble breathing. And I think he's in his car, and I think he shot himself in the head. And about a month later, I got an email from my friend confirming that was the case. That's what happened.
Wow. That is truly amazing. What does that do to you, right? Like, obviously it's confirmation, right? Like, it's validity. But also, like, man, to connect with that, right? And feel someone else going through that, like, that's got to do something to you, right?
Well, that's what you do as a psychic detective. That
Do you
is,
have,
a lot of times you're experiencing what the victim went through, and sometimes I've had the disgusting experience of feeling what the perpetrator went through. And
really?
yes,
What is that like?
it's really disgusting. I mean, it's just gross. Um, you just you want to you want to take a psychic bath like nonstop, and because you're inside that consciousness, and very unpleasant. It's creepy. You don't like to see yourself as creepy. You don't like
Sure.
to feel yourself as creepy. But when you do that, you have to be willing to take that risk of experiencing within your full being the well, it's more than insanity of that person. It's a visceral ick. It's ugh.
Mhm. Well, psychic bath, right? Like, how do you get rid of that energy for yourself?
I'm not one of those. I'm not your typical psychic person who says, "Oh, you got to surround yourself with white light. You have to protect yourself, put yourself in a bubble, all that stuff." No, I don't do that. I think your best bubble, or the equivalent of a bubble, is that, and I've told this to my students for many years: know your spiritual allies, because if you're venturing forth into the spiritual realms, it's not all good. And I know that people, a lot of, I used to do paranormal investigations also. A lot of paranormal investigators think it's sort of a hoot. You go in there and, you challenge those ghosts, come on out, because you're an idiot and I know it. Come on, show yourself. And I'm thinking, these people really don't know what they're doing. Because I have plenty of colleagues who've come back with attachments, or they get cut or bumped or punched by spirits,
Hmm.
and it's not a fun thing. So they're not walking into it with, I don't think, a knowledge of, we do have a physical existence. And if you are walking into the purely spiritual existence, you got to walk in there with spiritual beings who are purely spiritual, and know they're there to walk that walk with you.
Sure.
And
Who are your spiritual allies?
um I don't really tell people that.
Oh, no, you don't. You don't really tell people that, but would
No,
you?
I
Would you?
really don't. No, I really don't want to.
No,
It's very, very personal to me.
that's cool. I can respect that.
And everybody's got their own, and
That's cool.
yeah.
You don't have to. We don't have to talk about that. But I think that's cool, right? That we have spiritual allies. How do we find our own, right? Like you don't have to tell me who your people are, but how does one find their own spiritual ally?
A lot of people find them through, maybe deceased relatives who they were close with. Um, some people find them through what they call angels or celestial beings, and some people find them through other manifestations of spiritual consciousness, I guess.
That's cool. Can you feel different energies? Like when you're talking to like higher beings, maybe I say higher beings, but like I don't even know if they're higher. I just say that because like I think they are. But like angel beings or archangels or ascended masters or anything like that, is there a difference in their energy?
Let me tell you something. Again, I'm not like your classic psychic who says, "Yep, they're angels. Yep, we've got archangels." Yeah, I don't come from a Catholic background, so that's not built into me. Okay, um, and ascended masters, good for them. But if I don't connect with whatever energy they have, I don't have the ability, unless I'm really trying to work on the identification of a master. I'm not looking to identify whatever those energies are, but I know they're there, and yeah, you could feel them, and yeah, they're different.
Hmm. Um, what is your work now? I think you've done a lot, right?
Mhm.
The paranormal and what is it? Ufology, I think that is that what it's called?
Mhm.
What does that look like?
In what way? How do you mean?
I don't even know what that is, to be honest with you. Like,
Oh, very simple. So you know what a UFO is, right?
sure, yeah,
Okay, it's UFOlogy. So it has to do with the study of, well, they're calling them UAPs now, um, unidentified aerial phenomena, as opposed to, craft, because the entire concept of, well, what's a craft that's unidentified, that kind of has clearly spilled into the area of consciousness, and it's deeply connected, which is Jacques Vallée, wrote about that years ago, and I think it's become finally more and more clear to a lot of people.
Sure.
So yeah.
I just got done reading Chris Bledsoe's work, UFO of God. Have you read that or heard of him before?
Yeah, he's a friend.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Love his book. Listen to some of his stuff. I mean, it's the orbs, and his story is just phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, how do you connect with that, right? Like, how do you, because, like, I mean, his story is like the very beginning of it can be scary, especially for those who are not, like, he was, I mean, he went through a lot of trauma with his family. I mean, ostracized from society. I mean, I don't even know, like, um, for someone to experience something like that and to like even think of it as being conscious and not being like, I don't know. What do you think? Is that truly out of this universe? I think it's just consciousness, right? Like it is like introducing itself to us and like trying to connect with us.
He has a very, very, I think it was a very, in many ways, a very religious type of experience. And he has certain, I mean, and I don't question anything about that, because I mean, people have had, whatever you want to call it, spiritual encounters. People claim to have had spiritual encounters with, the Virgin Mary or angels or whoever. And I think, things show up a certain way. And from all the work that I've done in the psychic realms, there's no language, okay? Or we have to learn the language of what we're trying to identify. So many people, I don't know if you ever heard of John Dee.
Mm-mm.
He was the 16th century mathematician in the court for Queen Elizabeth I in England. And he was known for having the largest library, I think, in Europe. He was a very, very well-educated guy. Anyway, he eventually worked with another guy, and of course, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he was praying in his chapel one day, and an angel appeared at the window, and it was on the second floor, and handed him a crystal egg. So he used that sort of egg, I guess, or it was a crystal, to translate alphabets, and it became sort of the first angelic language, or one of the very first. And it was literally in every sense of the word, a light language, because he was using refractions of the light to copy down this new alphabet. Now, some people might say, well, maybe that was just an ET that showed up. Some people might say, well, yeah, that was an angel. Some people might say, well, that was some form of an altered consciousness, and he was encountering, some version of himself. It doesn't really matter, because it's all an interpretation of the experience. And you gotta attach a word that makes sense to you, that resonates with you, to bring it back and somehow try to describe it to somebody else or to yourself.
Sure. Have you ever had any experiences with UFOs or anything, like orbs or anything like that?
Oh, sure, all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Do you just create an intent for yourself and you see that and connect with that? Like, how does that work?
I've done it that way. I mean, with I would say with ET, with the UFO craft. No, no, not at all. My best biggest experience was with my daughter, who was about 18 at the time. And we were coming out of a local movie theater in Parsippany in New Jersey, about 5 minutes from our house. And it's in a mall area that's sandwiched between two big highways. And the first thing that was odd was that there was nobody in the movie theater. And I believe it was I've forgotten the exact day of the week. It may have been a Sunday, or a Monday, but there was always somebody there. You always have somebody at concessions or somebody sweeping up if it's late at night. And we got out at 11:45 at night. We go into the parking lot, and again, there are no customers there. There was nobody watching the movies that night, and there are no employees, which is weird. And my daughter looks up in the sky. She said, "What's that?" And to make a very long story short, it was a mothership that was about 500 to 1,000 feet up in the air. It was within, I would say, about a quarter of a mile from us. It was just sitting in the sky. It was covered with orange lights. It was the size of a football field. It was crazy huge. And it was boomerang shaped. And I figured for a long time, if I ever said any of that stuff to anybody, even somebody who had seen, UFO flying saucers, that kind of stuff, they would think I was an idiot, because I didn't know that boomerang-shaped craft are for real. I had never heard of anybody seeing a craft that was that huge. And since then, of course, I have. I've been able to research it and stuff. Anyway, there was a very large orb, white, luminescent. I estimated it was about 15 to 20 feet, that telescoped open off of one of the wings as we're watching this thing. And it detached. It floated around like it was under intelligent guidance, like it was looking for something, actually. It did these very strange movements around the craft, and eventually went underneath and behind it, disappeared for a second, came over the top, and then redocked onto the same place where it came from, and then boom, gone. And then the entire craft, this massive orange light colored thing in the sky, either cloaked or dematerialized in 3 phases. And my daughter was terrified. She was yelling, "Let's go, let's go, let's go." And I said, "Well, I got to see what this thing does." I have to. Why wouldn't you? Assuming you're not scared. But anyway, she started to want to describe what she had seen. I said, "You know what? Stop. We're not going to talk about it until we get home. And we're both going to draw whatever we saw." So I dumped out a bunch of, all I had were like really bad crayons from a long time ago. And we both kind of sketched out what we saw. And what we saw was identical. And after that time, for close to 2 years, she and I received telephone call interruptions. We'd be talking. She was in New York. I was in New Jersey. And we would suddenly hear a very weird, cold, remote, electronic sounding voice, like it's coming through waves of distortion. And it was not like any, I was familiar with the little machines you can get to, distort a voice on the phone. Nothing like that. This was spooky. And it wasn't speaking any language that I knew. And, I obviously speak English. I'm fluent in French, and I've got conversational knowledge of German and a bit of Thai. And on top of that, I can understand a bunch of other languages, even though I never studied them, don't know them, but I have an ear for it. It was nothing like that. And it would keep talking like it was speaking sentences, sort of. And it was sort of like, like that. And you go, ooh. And my daughter and I couldn't hear each other. we could not speak to each other. At that point, we were only allowed to hear, we both heard it. And when it was done, it would hang up both of us simultaneously, and we wouldn't be able to call each other back for about 5 to 10 minutes. And eventually, and this, as I said, this went on and on and on. And eventually, it happened between my daughter and some of her friends and me and some of my colleagues. So, we weren't making this thing up. People heard it. It was weird. And that's what caused me to write my book, How to Talk to an Alien.
Right.
So,
So you're hearing this, like, how did you were you able to communicate with them and understand them at some point?
no. And my logical, analytical mind was trying to figure out, well, what language is it? What are they speaking? What's their syntax? What's their vocabulary? Blah, blah, blah. No. However, I have a feeling, and it's just a hunch, that I absorbed what was being said. And I will say that about long after this had stopped, and it must have been, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe 4 years afterwards, I got woken up in the middle of the night. Had been asleep, and I heard that voice. It was telepathic, and it woke me up. And it was, it sounded like it was exterior. And that was weird because I had never received information that way from that entity ever. It had always been very electronic on a telephone. And I called up my daughter and I told her, she said, well, that's really weird because yesterday I was, for the first time, leaving a phone message for a girlfriend of mine. And as I was leaving the message, that voice came in and interrupted. So there was something. So there's obviously, there are means of communication going on, all different levels.
That didn't freak you out at all? I mean, you say it's weird, but like, I don't know. I feel like I'd be freaking out.
Well, yeah, but you'd have to be in my life to know how many things I've done that would have freaked out most people a long, long, long time ago. I just don't get scared easily. I would say, well, I'll give you the one thing that did frighten me. And I've seen and experienced stuff that would, send people running. I had set up in my bedroom sort of what I would call a spiritual perimeter. Sort of, I wasn't of there used to be a psychic, Sylvia Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she used to sort of boast very proudly about the fact that there were, dead people lined up at the end of her bed every night, all of them waiting to talk to her. She thought that was fantastic. I thought, how horrible. I knew that I had spirits in my house. I knew that. I'd heard them, and I had smelled them. You talk about the senses. You can tap into any of those with a spirit. And I didn't want that in my bedroom. My bedroom is for sleeping. I don't want to be communicating at that point. I didn't mind anybody hanging out in the rest of the house. That was fine. So I had gone to sleep, and I was very weirdly, I was sleeping on my side, very weirdly awoken very abruptly. There was no noise. And when I opened my eyes in that a bit of a twilight zone, not sleeping, I'm an extremely light sleeper. And I've been a lucid dreamer since I was a little kid. I've been able to get into other people's dreams and verify it with them and with the timing and the content and the images, everything. Okay. It's none of that stuff. I was wide awake, opened my eyes, and I saw what I could only sort of describe. It was extremely vague. It sort of looked like, I think it was either I forget which. It was either the Munsters or the Addams Family that had cousin It.
Yeah.
Sort of like he was like about 3 feet tall and just sort of weirdly like a pile of hair.
Sure.
Okay.
With a little top hat.
Yeah, with a little top hat, exactly. And whatever this was, except this one was sort of brown. And I had never read anything about anything like that, never talked to anybody about that, never seen it, never thought about it. I don't think I could have dreamed it up. And whatever it was staring at me like this far away, my face, which kind of freaked me out having just woken up. But even that would not be enough to scare me, because I don't scare easily. But what happened was that I believe it was the energy that came from this entity. It created one of the worst sensations of doom. And I mean doom, like catastrophic doom in my head, which was not like me at all. I mean, even if I got nervous about something, I don't go into that state of, it was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I have, well, anyway, I started praying, and it eventually just sort of poof, was gone, never came back again. I have since read about entities that allegedly feed on negative human emotions, because they want to experience it sort of vicariously because they can't.
So like energy vampires. What we hear about that, right?
Yeah, except they're not just kind of pulling the energy out of you, but they're generating something inside of you that triggers it.
Really?
Yeah,
Well,
because
how do you fight against that, right?
well, that's why I said know your spiritual allies.
What kind of prayer did you say when that entity was
Oh,
facing you?
I'm pretty basic. So, it's kind of like, be here, protect me, save me, please, please, please.
Wow, that is so fascinating. Yeah, that would be like, did the doom, was it visions too? Like wasn't just a feeling,
No,
but visions as well?
no.
No?
No, it was as visceral as if you got poisoned and you want to vomit.
Really? So like
Just go,
physical.
like, it's
Yeah.
just like, there are no words, there's no vision, there's no nothing. It's just totally visceral.
Wow. What about out of body experiences? Have you ever had any of those?
Well, let's see.
Are you trying to count them right now?
No. I always had a problem, and maybe if you haven't figured out already, I mean, I'm just kind of this basic analytical person, okay? And when people because I used to ask people, well, what's it like an out of body experience? And I know I have many, many friends who've had many of them, okay? And they always sounded somewhat extraordinary. Suddenly they're not in the same place. They're completely transported. Some of them see themselves kind of up in the air, moving around, all that kind of stuff. Now, I do know, because I was a subject, I don't know if you heard of Dr. Michael Persinger. He was a great, really fascinating parapsychologist, and a neuropsychologist, Canadian. He's passed away now, but he created what's called the God helmet, which was quite famous.
It seems
And
like so familiar.
I was the 11th subject to the successor to the God helmet to be tested on it. Okay, which had a slightly more subtle range of reactions, apparently. But the God helmet, because what you had usually, I don't know, 8 or so what they call solenoids that are attached on a sort of halo around the top of your head, and there's an electromagnetic pulse that goes around the brain, and essentially, and it was, and most strongly on the temporal lobes. And so what it would do, apparently, for a lot of people, is that they would suddenly have, well, they would see different entities, sometimes same deceased relatives, angels, the great spiritual religious leaders, whatever. Some of them felt their bodies were kind of like doppelgangers, or they felt like two different entities. And some people had out of body experiences, so they could, and that kind of suggests that there may be this, like deja vu. Some people described as sort of like a chemical malfunction. Okay. So I don't know if that's true or not. So I asked my mentor, Ingo Swann, who created remote viewing back in 72. And I said, I don't know if I've ever had that before. I don't know what that is. I don't know what it means. Have I felt like I'm sort of out of my body? No, I guess. But have I ever had the experience of suddenly being slammed into a different reality? I don't think so. I mean, I know when my mind will, if I'm driving, for example, you talk about highway hypnosis, all of a sudden, you're in your thinking world, and you don't even see what's in front of you. You don't think about what you're driving or the cars that are zooming in front of you or where you are. You're gone. So is that out of body? I don't know. But that's maybe the closest that I ever got to something like that. But anyway, so I had I told you I'm a lucid dreamer. So I'd had a dream about going to visit Ingo in Manhattan. And I said, I flew through these skyscrapers, these buildings, I flew through the walls, through the, the bricks, the concrete and everything else. It just sort of dematerialized for me as I went through it. And I was coming to see you. And I said, is that an out-of-body experience? He said, yes. So now I'm really confused. So I don't know. I don't know if I've had an out-of-body experience or not. I really, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated with him. I'm a big fan of Robert Monroe and Tom Campbell's work, right? And Tom says, we try so hard to get outside of our bodies, but to your point of using your imagination or going when you're driving and you kind of lose focus of what you're doing and you're in another world. Like he points to that and says that's out of body because you're not there anymore. You're in a different reality set, right? Like you're in a different mindset, different frame. Which is fascinating to me too. It's like we're always trying to get out of the body, right? Like to me, it's like the purpose is we're here, right? Like in meditation, they're like, why do you keep trying to leave, right? Like you're here, you're human for a reason. Why don't you be human first? Like try that for, try
Right.
that on for size.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's pretty darn complex.
Sure. I mean, all the emotion. I mean, just study like your background is so diverse and everything, right? Like it's just so fascinating. Like seeing a UFO, like a mothership, right? Like in this reality, like wow.
Oh,
That's
and I've
just
seen others. And by the way, once you see one, then you review everything that's happened in the past and you say, oh, you restring that information differently on a different, same beads, different necklace. Okay. And so then I began to realize, oh yeah, pretty
you know
sure
what's fascinating too is like you're exactly right. Like listening to Chris's story, his book, right? He talks about the white lady and coming to him and speaking to him and the orbs. Um, and I was driving, listening to the Audible book, and I immediately started thinking about like, what's that story like that Catholic legend of like the kids of Fatima,
Mhm.
where the Mother Mary comes and then they have three prophecies, and then on the third prophecy the sun starts moving. I'm like, what if the white lady, right? That was the white lady, and the sun is the orb, like what Chris is experiencing. Because Chris was talking about a huge ass orb that was like the size sometimes houses, right? Or it could be possibly the sun moving, and it was like fire, right? So what if these people were seeing the white lady and in orbs in this field, and because of our dogma, we classify it as this, and it's that's what they were experiencing, but because of our dogma we say it has to be this. Does any of that make sense?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have those conversations with people a lot. And it has to, I mean, yeah, you can look at that many different ways, actually, but I mean, you can dismiss it as some kind of mass hallucination, okay? Or you could say, no, that was a manifestation of something religious. Or you could say that was some type of messaging from the cosmos somehow, or it was an actual physical event. What the heck was it? It depends who you are, what you're being influenced by, and what you believe. Which, by the way, science is guilty of that as much as anybody else is.
Sure. Having biases, like
Fundamental biases. I mean, where they think, well, of course, that's the answer. Oh, no. Existence and consciousness is incredibly subtle. And it has very much to do with interpretation. And if you don't understand how you interpret physical reality, then you're not really entitled to say, well, this is how physical reality works. And by the way, I do psychokinesis too. I trained in Russia for a while, worked with scientists on psychokinesis. And
really,
when you have that's one of the highest forms of in my opinion, understanding how consciousness and the interpretations that your mind can make about consciousness can literally, and I mean literally, change physical reality. And how is that even possible? It's possible because you've reoriented your interpretations.
is that like spoon bending?
Well, I've done lots of that. Yeah, you
How
can.
does that? How does that? Because I know the Monroe Institute, they teach a class on that. They facilitate that. Like, how do you
Yeah,
bend a
that's
spoon?
Joe Gallenberger, I think,
Yeah.
does that.
How do you do that?
Well, there are many different ways you can do it. I mean, I can only tell you from my experience, and everybody's a little bit different. Oh, you're jumping back and forth there.
Yeah, I was changing cameras.
Okay, you're not doing a little mind control on the the very first spoon bending class workshop I ever did, there probably were about 10 people. And we all kind of introduced ourselves, said who we were, what we did, all that stuff. And our teacher was Gene Ang, and he was lovely, lovely. And he gave us all, I think it was 7 or 8 forks. And they were like not super, not the really strong, but they were strong enough. They weren't like bad cafeteria quality. Okay. Not like
Sure.
anyway, so he gave him all this. He said, okay, you take one of your forks, you put them away, put them in a pocket, put them in your pocketbook, whatever you got, just hide them, just keep them separate. So we all did that. And then he gave us, as I recall, it was a long time ago, it was something like maybe like 6 different methods of ways that you could manipulate mentally the concept of, well, how do I get this, physical piece of metal to bend? And immediately some woman, I think she was psychic, she said, oh, it's bent. And I'm thinking, whoa, how'd that happen? It's like even before he got through the first session, oh, it's bending already. Wow. And then pretty soon he gets through all the different methods. Everybody in this group has finally bent a fork. And it's just now between me and some old guy. Okay. And the old guy is like very literal and very and I'm thinking, oh, this is truly embarrassing. I'm like supposed to be a psychic, and I can't seem to do this. And he finally, the old guy says, yep, it's bent a little bit. Yep. And that was me. I was left. I can't tell you how embarrassed I was. And the teacher says, okay, well, listen, I had all my forks lined up on the side of the armchair, very straight. And he says, okay, get the fork out of your, wherever you put it, which I did. I pulled it out. I had it in my pocketbook. The second I reached down, because I had completely given up, I said, I'm a failure. I cannot do this. I release all of my intentional energy. And the second I did that and pulled this thing out, the fork was bending. And then I don't know why, because again, it's a visceral, touchy-feely mental thing. I knew that every single fork was completely primed and would bend. So I had them all lined up one by one. Foo, 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 every single one of them, everything bent. So you can use, I mean, I believe at the heart of it, doesn't matter which method you're using, but the most important thing is you give up the desire for control. And by the way, intellectuals and analytical people like me don't like to do that.
Me neither.
Yeah, you have to. You have to, because it's that. Okay. An intention is a prejudice because it's based on the belief that if you intend to do something, there will be a cause and effect. And that's a belief system. And unless and until you release that belief system, because this stuff doesn't work that way, you won't be able to do it.
Wow. Well said. I like that. You're absolutely right. An intention, cause and effect, belief system. I love it. Nancy, how are you doing? You holding up all right?
Yeah, of course.
Man, this has been awesome. You're so fun to talk to. I can't thank you enough for joining the show. I can't even believe this, like, it's gone by so quick.
It did go by quickly.
How can people connect with you? How can they find out more? How can they, talk to you, book a session? I don't know, become a client?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, and I do. I have an international clientele, and I got international remote viewing students, both. And if anybody's interested, they can always get in touch with me. I've got a couple of websites. Main one is theskepticalpsychic.com. And the other one, which I don't use as much, is called talkalien.com. But either way, they can reach me. I've got my email on that is ndt at theskepticalpsychic.com. Then get me that way.
Nancy, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.